Imagine yourself in a medieval castle, surrounded by imposing walls, knights in shining armor, and servants busy with their daily tasks. Now, think about the darkness. No light bulbs, no switches, no electricity. How did medieval kings keep their castles lit? How did they transform these stone fortresses into habitable places, full of life and warmth, even during the longest and darkest nights? That's right, lighting in the Middle Ages was a monumental challenge. In a time when electricity was an unimaginable concept, castle inhabitants relied on ingenious, and often dangerous, techniques to keep the lights on. Candles, torches, fireplaces, and even mirrors were used not only to illuminate but also to demonstrate power, wealth, and sophistication. And, of course, all of this without the help of modern technology. But here's the question that will guide our journey. How did servants, craftsmen, and even the kings themselves ensure that castles remained illuminated, even during harsh winters or prolonged sieges? And what can we learn from these ancient techniques that still inspire us in a world increasingly dependent on electricity? Get ready for a journey through time, where we'll explore the secrets of medieval lighting, from beeswax candles, symbols of luxury and status, to the creative strategies used in times of war. Let's discover how medieval castles shone, even on the darkest nights. If you think today's candles are ordinary, imagine having a beeswax candle in the Middle Ages. These candles weren't just a source of light, they were a symbol of status, wealth, and sophistication. While most people used tallow candles, made from animal fat, which produced smoke and an unpleasant smell, the castles of kings and nobles glowed with the soft aroma and clear light of beeswax candles. But why was beeswax so special? For starters, it burned cleaner and brighter than tallow. While tallow candles blackened castle walls with soot, beeswax candles produced a golden, almost smokeless light. Additionally, they had a pleasant smell, almost like honey, which helped mask the common odors of medieval castles, something highly valued in an era where hygiene wasn't exactly a priority. The production of these candles was a complex and expensive process. Beeswax was a rare product, obtained through beekeeping, an activity that required knowledge and care. Medieval beekeepers created hives in forests or gardens, and the wax was extracted manually, a meticulous and time-consuming task. Once collected, the wax was melted, filtered, and molded into candle shapes, often with the help of wicks made from natural fibers like cotton or linen. But here's a curious detail: not everyone could afford beeswax candles. They were so valuable that, in many cases, they were used only on special occasions, like royal banquets or religious ceremonies. For everyday use, even nobles relied on tallow candles or other forms of lighting. And in times of scarcity, beeswax could even be used as a bargaining chip or diplomatic gift. And speaking of royal banquets, have you ever wondered how castles were illuminated during these grand events? How did servants keep hundreds of candles burning without causing fires? That's a story that takes us directly to the next topic: torches and lanterns, the common lighting of castles. While beeswax candles illuminated the halls of nobles, most rooms in castles relied on a simpler yet equally fascinating form of lighting: torches and lanterns. These methods were practical, effective, and, above all, accessible, at least by medieval standards. But how exactly did they work? And why were they so popular? Torches were the most basic form of lighting. Made from sticks or pieces of wood wrapped in cloth soaked in resin, fat, or oil, they were attached to castle walls using metal brackets. When lit, they produced a bright light but also a lot of smoke and soot. Imagine the corridors of a medieval castle, with flickering torches casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. A scene as beautiful as it was dangerous, given the constant risk of fire. Lanterns, on the other hand, were a more sophisticated version of torches. Made of metal or glass, they contained a flame protected by a screen or glass, which reduced the risk of accidents and allowed them to be carried from place to place. Oil lanterns, for example, were popular in indoor areas, where torch smoke could be a problem. They were fueled with fish oil, olive oil, or other available fuels, and their light was more stable and controllable. But here's an interesting detail: both torches and lanterns required constant maintenance. The servants responsible for lighting had to ensure that torches were always fueled and that lanterns didn't run out of oil. In larger castles, this task occupied much of the time of dozens of servants, who worked in shifts to keep the lights on. And speaking of servants, have you ever wondered how they handled lighting during grand events, like royal banquets? How did they keep hundreds of torches and lanterns burning without causing accidents? That's a story that takes us to the heart of life in medieval castles, where lighting was both a necessity and an art. While torches and lanterns illuminated the corridors and rooms of castles, there was an element that did much more than just provide light: fireplaces and stoves. These structures were the heart of many rooms, offering warmth, light, and even a place to cook. In a world where winter could be brutal and nights endless, fireplaces were a source of comfort and survival. Medieval fireplaces were impressive. Built from stone or bricks, they occupied prominent places in the great halls of castles. Some were so large that a person could stand inside them. And they weren't just functional. Many fireplaces were decorated with carvings and details that reflected the status of the castle's owner. After all, a large, well-decorated fireplace was a symbol of wealth and power. But how did fireplaces provide light? The live flame of the fire was the primary source, projecting a warm, flickering light that illuminated the room. Additionally, the flames reflected off stone and metal surfaces, amplifying the lighting effect. In some castles, mirrors were strategically placed to reflect the fire's light, creating a brighter and cozier atmosphere. Stoves, more common in castle kitchens, also played an important role in lighting. While cooks prepared feasts for kings and nobles, the fire from the stoves kept the room lit and warm. And, like fireplaces, stoves were built to be efficient, with chimneys that directed smoke outside the castle, preventing rooms from becoming smoky. But here's a fascinating detail. Keeping a fireplace or stove lit wasn't a simple task. Servants had to gather firewood, light the fire, and ensure it didn't go out during the night. In larger castles, there was even a firemaster, responsible for overseeing all fireplaces and stoves. It was hard work but essential for the survival and comfort of everyone in the castle. Now, imagine what it would be like to live in a castle during the day, when sunlight flooded the rooms. How did medieval architects make the most of this natural light, using windows, stained glass, and even mirrors to illuminate spaces without relying on fire? That's a story that takes us to one of the smartest secrets of medieval lighting. Medieval people knew that sunlight was a precious resource that couldn't be wasted. During the day, natural light was the primary source of illumination, and medieval architects developed incredible techniques to make the most of it. Windows, stained glass, and even mirrors were strategically used to turn sunlight into a powerful tool. Windows were the most obvious but also the most important element. In medieval castles, windows weren't just openings in the walls, they were designed to capture sunlight efficiently. In many cases, windows were large and positioned to face south, where sunlight was most abundant. However, not all windows were the same. While the rooms of nobles had wide, decorated windows, servants' quarters often had smaller, simpler openings. But windows weren't just functional, they were also beautiful. Stained glass windows, especially in chapels and noble halls, were a form of art. Made from pieces of colored glass joined by lead, these windows filtered sunlight, creating luminous patterns that changed throughout the day. Imagine sunlight streaming through a medieval stained glass window, casting vibrant colors on the stone floor, an almost magical experience. And, of course, we can't forget about mirrors. Although medieval mirrors were very different from the ones we have today, they were made from polished metal, like silver or bronze. They were used intelligently to reflect and amplify light. In some castles, mirrors were strategically placed near windows or fireplaces, directing light into darker areas. It was a simple but effective solution that showed how much medieval people understood basic optics. But here's a curiosity. Not all castles could afford stained glass windows or large mirrors. In colder regions or during times of war, the priority was keeping heat inside, which meant smaller windows and less natural light. In these situations, artificial lighting, like torches and fireplaces, became even more crucial. And speaking of challenging situations, have you ever wondered how lighting was maintained during sieges, when castles were isolated and resources were scarce. How did medieval people adapt their lighting techniques to survive in times of war? That's a story that takes us to the next chapter of our journey. Imagine a medieval castle under siege. The gates are closed, enemies are outside, and supplies are running low. In this situation, lighting wasn't just a matter of comfort, it was a matter of survival. How did castle inhabitants keep the lights on when oil, wax, and even firewood were in short supply? The answer lies in creativity and adaptation. One of the first measures was strict rationing. Candles, torches, and lanterns were used only when absolutely necessary. In many cases, only essential areas of the castle, like the walls, soldiers' quarters, and kitchens, remained lit. Banquet halls and noble chambers, normally filled with light, were left in the dark to conserve resources. But rationing was just the beginning. Medieval people also turned to improvised lighting techniques. For example, instead of using expensive and scarce beeswax candles, they used tallow candles or even melted animal fat. Torches were made from any available combustible material, like dry branches or old cloth soaked in resin. In extreme situations, even fish oil or grease was used to keep lanterns burning. Another smart strategy was the use of natural light during the day. Castle inhabitants made the most of sunlight, opening windows and doors whenever possible. In some cases, mirrors were used to reflect sunlight into darker areas, like hallways or windowless rooms. It was a way to save fuel and keep the castle functional. And, of course, we can't forget about creativity in times of crisis. When supplies were running low, medieval people had to improvise. In some castles, servants collected tree resin or fat from slaughtered animals to make fuel. In others, they used unusual materials, like nutshells or oily seeds, to keep the flames burning. It was a matter of making do with what was available. But here's an intriguing detail. Even with all these strategies, life during a siege was incredibly difficult. Darkness could be terrifying, and the lack of lighting made the castle more vulnerable to surprise attacks. In many cases, a castle's ability to withstand a siege depended not only on the strength of its defenders but also on the efficiency of its lighting techniques. Now, imagine what it would be like to live in a castle where lighting was a matter of life and death. How did medieval people deal with the myths and curiosities surrounding their lighting practices? That's a story that takes us to the next chapter of our journey. Medieval lighting is surrounded by myths and legends, many of which persist to this day. Some of these stories are based on real facts, while others are exaggerations or inventions. Let's separate fact from fiction and discover some curiosities that will surprise you. One of the most common myths is that medieval castles were dark and gloomy places where people lived in near total darkness. While it's true that lighting wasn't as efficient as it is today, castles weren't as shadowy as we imagine. With candles, torches, fireplaces, and strategically placed windows, castles could be quite well lit, at least in the main areas. Servants' quarters and less important areas, however, were indeed darker. Another curiosity involves beeswax candles. It's said that they were so valuable they were used as currency. While this is an exaggeration, it's true that beeswax was an expensive and highly prized product. In some cases, it was used as a diplomatic gift or to pay taxes, but not as everyday currency. Now, here's a surprising fact. Medieval people already used public lighting techniques. In some medieval towns, lanterns were placed in the streets to light the way at night. These lanterns were fueled with oil or fat and maintained by servants or night watchmen. It was a rudimentary system, but it shows that the concern for lighting wasn't limited to castles. And speaking of castles, did you know that some of them had advanced lighting systems for their time? In castles like Château de Chambord in France, mirrors were used to reflect sunlight into dark corridors. In others, like Dover Castle in England, strategically positioned windows allowed natural light to illuminate interior spaces during the day. But perhaps the greatest curiosity is the role of women in castle lighting. While men were often responsible for tasks like lighting torches or maintaining fireplaces, women played a crucial role in candle production and lighting resource management. They were the guardians of candle-making techniques and knew the secrets of the herbs and resins used to improve light quality. These stories and curiosities show us that medieval lighting was far more complex and interesting than we often imagine. And by looking to the past, we can find valuable lessons on how to deal with today's challenges. After all, the need to light spaces efficiently and safely is just as relevant now as it was in the Middle Ages. When we look at the lighting techniques of medieval castles, it's impossible not to be impressed by the creativity, knowledge, and resilience of the people of that time. In a world without electricity, they developed methods that not only ensured their survival but also created impressive and functional environments. And the most fascinating part? Many of these practices are still present in our lives today, albeit in modernized forms. Think about the candles we use for romantic dinners or party decorations. They are a direct legacy of medieval beeswax candles, which illuminated the halls of nobles. Or the decorative lanterns we see in gardens and patios. They are an evolution of the oil lanterns that lit castle corridors. Even the use of mirrors to amplify light, a medieval technique, has inspired modern designs for natural lighting in architecture. But the lessons go beyond lighting. The Middle Ages teaches us about the importance of sustainability and maximizing resources. In a world where energy waste is a global problem, medieval practices of recycling and reuse can inspire us to rethink our habits. After all, why waste electricity when natural light can be so efficient? And, of course, there's the lesson of adaptation. Medieval people faced immense challenges, from harsh winters to prolonged sieges, and found ways to adapt and survive. At a time when the modern world faces its own crises, this ability to innovate and persevere is more relevant than ever. So, the next time you light a candle, look at a fireplace, or enjoy sunlight streaming through a window, remember the medieval castles and the people who, with ingenuity and determination, ensured that light reached them, even in the toughest times. And who knows, maybe you'll be inspired to try some of these ancient techniques in your own home. After all, as the saying goes, the past is the key to the future.